for joining. I think I will just be audio only today, but I'm Simona Lee. I work on NYSERDA's multifamily team, and we are really excited to launch this new low carbon capital planning support for the multifamily sector. My colleague Jesse Patterson will be giving you all a more detailed walkthrough today of how this offering works, what the eligibility criteria are, and what we're looking for in some of the new analyses that we will include in these studies. This is a new component we're releasing through the FlexTech program, so you can find the program documents there. Jesse will talk a little bit more about that, and we're actually providing a higher level of cost share for these different studies that are focused on building improvements that enable electrification in multifamily buildings. So also as part of this new support, we're including some new analysis that Jesse will be talking in more detail about. Really because of the barriers that we've seen in the market facing low carbon retrofits, especially the high upfront cost, we wanted to start thinking about ways to bring in the additional sources of benefits that we know are attributed to some of the low carbon solutions to really broaden the value proposition of these upgrades, as well as thinking about how we can layer these upgrades on top of planned or potential improvements in building owners' existing capital plans so that we can reduce the incremental cost of these retrofits. So to achieve those goals, we've actually developed some initial frameworks in this iteration of this offering to consider things like non-energy benefits or the qualitative benefits that go beyond just utility bill savings. So things like reduced noise, improved indoor air quality, reduced pests indoors, all of these that could be associated with different low carbon retrofits and building improvements. We did some research based on the literature that's out there related to these benefits, and we've pulled those into an initial framework so that we can guide some of your thinking and discussions in this area and make sure that your customers are aware of these potentially marketable, very marketable benefits. The second thing we've brought into this offering is a broader, more comprehensive cost-benefit analysis framework. So these are some of the quantified benefits outside of just utility bills and energy cost savings. Things like cost reductions through repairs and maintenance or other operational expenses, as well as costs like penalties and fines that you can avoid due to putting some of these improvements in place. And finally, we've come up with a high-level 10-year horizon phased implementation plan. And this is really meant to highlight the planned and potential improvements that your customer might already be considering so that these could be opportunities to consider the lower carbon, the deeper retrofit alternative, and really reduce the incremental cost of those improvements by leveraging existing capital improvement points. So with that said, we're really excited to be working with you all and bringing in these new projects, and I will turn it over to Jesse to take you guys through today's presentation. Thank you guys again.
All right, so thank you, Simona, and welcome everyone. I really appreciate you taking your time to make it today. For those who aren't familiar with me, my name's Jesse Patterson. I support NYSERDA's multifamily team, and I'm here today to discuss the NYSERDA Multifamily Low Carbon Capital Planning Initiative. And just so everyone is aware, we are recording this webinar today, and we can always reference what we went over in the future. So I'll start off with today's agenda. So the first item on today's agenda is to go over the low carbon capital planning studies objectives. Next, we'll visit the program overview. Third, we'll go over the new final report supplement and provide a detailed walkthrough of that new deliverable. We'll go over the final meeting. And then at the end, we'll set aside some time for questions and next steps. So starting off with program objectives, The first objective is to support building and portfolio owners in developing portfolio level plans to help owners prioritize projects across their portfolio and or building specific plans to scope out specific projects and create implementation plans for these projects. Next, identify ways to leverage existing capital improvement points and phase in low carbon retrofits over time. Lastly, provide a more comprehensive framework for cost benefit analysis, such as highlighting incremental costs of deeper retrofits, going over avoided costs such as reduced maintenance, compliance with local laws, avoided fines, etc. And then lastly, additional benefits like higher resident satisfaction through reduced noise, improved air quality, and others. So next, we'll go over eligibility. So the low carbon capital planning studies must meet the existing FlexTech eligibility requirements. Additional requirements include studies must focus on electrification or electrification readiness building improvement measures. This means that they must transition at least one heating or cooling or domestic hot water system to a high performance electric technology, or significantly reduce heating and cooling load that can enable future electrification. An example would be envelope improvements, ventilation improvements, building electrical infrastructure, etc. And then lastly, all participants are required to work with a FlexTech consultant. Next, there will be two levels of eligible analysis through low carbon capital planning. Number one is the portfolio-wide planning study. These studies will be required to be ASHRAE level 1+ or above, and these will plan across an entire portfolio or subset of a portfolio and really enable building decision makers to prioritize, target, and phase in energy efficiency and electrification improvements within a portfolio. Next, there will be building specific studies. These studies will be required to meet ASHRAE level 2 or above. And what these studies are more detailed building specific level plans that identify information needed to enable building decision makers to implement a retrofit. So next we have the cost share levels for the capital planning studies. I'll give everyone a moment to review the chart on this slide. It goes over the study type, the energy analysis that's required for each study type, the cost shares, and then lastly, the cost share caps per project. Customers can do a portfolio-wide study and building-specific study. And some pre-implementation assistance activities, such as RFP development and bid review, would be eligible to be included in a building-specific study cost share scope. So I'll give everyone an extra moment to review the chart on this page. All right, so next we have the application process, scope of work, and deliverables. So before I dive too deep into this slide, I want to just point out that everything in black text is what is the same from regular FlexTech and the low carbon capital planning studies and what will be required. And then everything in blue text is everything that is a new requirement specific to low carbon capital planning studies. So starting off with the application process, the same application process will be required as the existing FlexTech projects. This includes the application, the scope of work with some additional content, and the kickoff, or also known as the scoping session call. Next, the scope of work. The standard FlexTech scope of work requirements such as tasks, schedule, budget, deliverables, the draft and final report, and any and all documentation that is currently required for FlexTech will still be required for the low carbon capital planning studies. Additional scope of work content includes explanation of linkage to electrification and required additional deliverables such as the final report supplement and final meeting. Next, that brings us into deliverables. The standard FlexTech project deliverables, such as the final and draft reports and the project summary spreadsheet, will still be required for low carbon capital planning studies. Additional deliverables include the final report supplement spreadsheet, both draft and final versions, as well as the final meeting with the customer, the FlexTech consultant, and NYSERDA, which includes presentation of study findings and discussion of next steps. So you may be asking yourself, why are we adding this final meeting? This is really to create an opportunity to review the different findings from the study and discuss these findings collectively with the customer, and to go over next steps and connect customers with implementation programs that may be a good fit. All right, so next we'll dive deep into the final report supplement walkthrough. So as I briefly mentioned in the previous slide, the final report supplement will be required in addition to the draft and final reports. What the final report supplement is a spreadsheet with multiple tabs that consists of the 4 sections identified in the visual on this slide. Number 1, customer and building information. Number 2, non-energy benefits. Number 3, cost benefit analysis. And number 4, long-term phased implementation plan. So when completing the final report supplement, please follow specific directions on each tab, as well as any additional instructions within each section. Most tabs do have the same instructions for portfolio level and building specific studies. But like I said, there will be an instructions box at the top of each tab that highlights whether the directions are the same or if there are separate sets of directions for each study type. All right, so jumping into the meat of the final report supplement, we'll start off with the first section, which is the customer portfolio. What this section does is gauge an understanding of the customer's portfolio and goals for the study. So collecting information along the lines of total number of buildings in the customer's portfolio, typical number of units, location, approximate percentage breakdown of coop condo rentals, percentage breakdown of affordable buildings versus market rate, and confirm which utilities, if any, are included in the rent. The next part of this section is the customer goals. And I pulled the customer goals chart right out of the report so everyone can get a good look. And what we're asking folks to do is rank the customer goals from 1 to 5. As you can see on this chart, there is a bunch of preset goals that we think will be common that we've included for reference. And then there's also a section for other in which you can indicate a customer is looking to achieve that goal, and there will be a notes column in which you can elaborate and provide some context if you choose a goal that falls in that other category. So next slide, we'll be going over the building or buildings information. So what we're looking for in this section of the final report supplement is to document existing building details for each building that is part of the study, such as building name and location, the year that buildings are constructed, the size and square footage, the height and stories, the number of units, and then the total baseline MMBTUs. The last two building characteristics are auto-calculated. So the typology, the tab will auto-calculate this based on the building height and the year that it was built. And then the EUI, or energy use intensity, is also auto-calculated on this tab based on the square footage and total baseline MMBTU. All right, so the next section of the final report supplement that we'll be going over are the non-energy benefits. So what we're looking for in this section is to give customers an understanding of the potential benefits of implementing a low carbon measures outside of simply just the utility cost savings and expenses. We're trying to gauge an understanding of what specific customers find important and identify non-energy benefits that are high importance to the specific customer, as these benefits may end up being a persuading factor when a customer is considering implementation. Examples of non-energy benefits include, but are not limited to, reduced noise, improved thermal comfort, improved air quality, and these non-energy benefits may lead to improved tenant satisfaction, a lower number of tenant complaints, lower tenant turnover, etc. So I'll just take a moment to go over how to complete this chart in the final report supplement. So you'll start off by looking at the building improvement category. Please be aware that this is just an excerpt from the tab, and there will be potential non-energy benefits identified for every building improvement category, but we'll just go over the envelope ones today. Next, you'll take a look at the specific non-energy benefits, or NEBs, and then confirm if the benefit is likely relevant to the recommended measures for the study buildings. Next, you'll work with the customer to confirm the importance level to the owner. The tab will have a drop down for you to select from: low, medium, or high. And then also the estimated financial impact on a scale from low, medium, and high. That will also be a drop down in the report. For each benefit that you have identified, you'll just want to provide a brief description of how the benefit is relevant to the recommended measures. So in this instance, the envelope for this hypothetical project, we think it will improve the tenant thermal comfort. And our description for this is: the recommended window replacements and air sealing will likely increase tenant thermal comfort by ... insert reasoning. So like I said, although I just included one example here, please be aware that when completing this chart, we'll want folks to provide a brief description for each of the non-energy benefits that have been identified. All right, so now we'll jump right into the comprehensive cost benefit analysis. This section of the final report supplement really consists of three parts that interact with one another. So the first is the current expenses. What this does is gauge the current expenses such as utilities, repairs and maintenance, local law compliance, and related expenses. Then we have the post-retrofit expenses. And what this section does is project the corresponding expenses following installation of recommended measures. And then lastly, the comprehensive cost benefit analysis itself compares the current expenses to post-retrofit expenses and considers comprehensive set of costs and benefits to inform financial cost benefit metrics. So we'll go into each of the three pieces that we discussed on the previous slide, starting off with the current expenses. So the current expenses will be broken down into utility expenses, repairs and maintenance, and then local law compliance. So starting off with utility expenses, this section is pulled right from the final report supplement to give everyone an idea of what it looks like. So what we're looking for in this section. So for building specific studies, please complete the charts for each building included in the study. For portfolio level studies, please complete the chart for the building with the highest EUI or energy use intensity value from the building's characteristics section of the report. And then I'll just provide a brief walkthrough of how to complete the chart on this slide. So you'll start off by inputting all the information into the blue cells, starting with current annual energy consumption. And next you'll input the current annual expenses in dollar amounts. Much of this information in these first two columns can be pulled from the project summary spreadsheet, which is already a standard FlexTech deliverable. Next, you'll estimate the annual percentage increase in expenses, and then you'll confirm what's driving this increase. There will be a drop down here with selections along the lines of tariff hikes, labor escalation rates, and others. Based on the information that you enter into the blue cells, this chart will calculate the expected annual expense in 5 years. The next expense that we'll be going over are the repairs and maintenance. These are normally based on a typical year budget, and repairs and maintenance expense categories include but are not limited to cleaning, elevator costs, pest control, grounds maintenance, trash removal, and others. And in this chart, we'll want to gauge the current annual expenses in dollar amounts for relevant categories. We'll want you to estimate the annual percentage increase in expenses along the same lines of the utility expenses, such as labor escalation rates, inflation, etc. And then based on the information that you input into the blue cells, this chart will auto-calculate the expected annual expense in 5 years. And to give everyone on the call an idea of what this chart looks like, it is right here. Just like the utility expenses chart, you'll put in the dollar amounts. We'll ask you to please estimate the annual percentage increase in expenses. And then, like I said, it will auto-calculate the annual expenses in 5 years based on the information that you input. And there's also, like most charts in the final report supplement, an area to add additional notes or context as needed. All right, so the third and final expense category are the local law compliance expenses. So you'll start off by completing all the information in the blue cells, starting with most recent or currently budgeted expense in dollars amount. Next, you'll input the frequency of the expense in number of years. So for example, 1 if it's an annual expense, or 5 if it's an expense that occurs every 5 years. And then based on the information that you input there, the annual expense will auto-calculate in this chart. Next, we'll ask for the estimated annual percentage increase in expenses. And then the projected annual expense in 5 years will also auto-calculate on this chart. As you can see, most of the expense categories and how to complete the charts for each specific one are similar. And then the last point of information that I do want to point out for local law compliance expenses is that potential fines and penalties for failing to achieve local law compliance regulations can also be captured in this section as a potential expense. So I'll move right along. Next, we have the post-retrofit expenses. So what we're looking for here is for you to follow the same directions and steps that we went over for the current expenses section, but apply them for the projected expenses post retrofit scenario. So we'll ask for you to provide updated categories of cost information for this post retrofit scenario in which a customer would implement measures such as post retrofit energy consumption, post retrofit annual cost savings, estimated percentages, and then the methodology for determining post retrofit annual savings estimates. And lastly, based on the information that you provide in this tab, the projected post retrofit annual savings and dollar amounts will auto calculate. All right. So the last part of the comprehensive cost benefit analysis is the comprehensive cost benefit analysis itself. So the total project cost will auto calculate based on the information that you've added in the current and post retrofit expenses tab, and so will the annual savings. Getting into the directions for the second chart at the bottom of this slide, for building specific studies, please complete the chart for each building included in the study. And for portfolio level studies, you'll want to complete the charts for the building with the highest EUI value or energy use intensity from the building's characteristics section. For all study types, we'll ask that you calculate the basic and comprehensive versions of the net present value and other financial metrics identified in this chart. All right, the fourth and final section of the final report supplement is the long-term phased implementation plan. This long-term phased plan is broken up into two different charts within the final report supplement. The first chart is the 10-year horizon, planned and potential capital planning milestones. What this is a high-level 10-year timeline for implementing the main components of a low-carbon retrofit over time, including the capital improvement milestone or trigger and time horizon. So I will walk you through this. The first step for this table is to select the relevant or planned potential major capital improvement milestone for the next 10 years. And that's the second column. And there'll be a drop down there with options such as equipment end of life, LL97, tenant turnover, refinancing, etc. Next, we'll ask that you provide a brief description of the capital planning milestone in the description column on the right-hand side. For example, here, we chose that a major capital improvement milestone for 2022 for a hypothetical project is LL97 local law compliance. And our description is we need to reduce emissions by 2022 to avoid local law compliance fines. Just to confirm, as I did with some of the other tables in this presentation, we're just providing one example for context, but we will ask for a brief description for each relevant capital planning improvement milestone that is part of the capital planning study. The next step is to replace the placeholder years with actual years in this first column. So a new report supplement, these years will be listed as year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and so on. And we'll want you to update those years accordingly. So example, if the plan starts in 2021, we'll have 2021, 2022, 2023, and so on. I'll move right along. All right. So the second part of the long-term phased implementation plan is the plan itself. And what this plan does is it leverages existing capital improvement points to phase in low carbon retrofits over time. So to walk you through how to complete this table, the first thing you'll want to do is use the drop-down list to select the year in which the study plans to undertake capital improvements in each building category. Next, we'll ask that you provide a brief description of how this building improvement category aligns with the specific planning milestone and/or potential improvements to consider at that time. So for example, this hypothetical project plans to undergo window improvements in 2024, and the description is planning to replace windows as part of anticipated refinancing in 2024 based on resident request. Refer to FlexTech report for details on recommended window improvements. Again, this is just one example, but we'll please ask to have a brief description included for each building improvement category and capital planning milestone that is relevant to the study. All right, that wraps up the final report supplement walkthrough, all of the 4 sections. So we'll jump right into the final meeting. So during the final meeting, we'll review the key takeaways from the low carbon capital plan, including highlights from the final report supplement. We'll discuss these collectively and address any questions or concerns that the customer may have. And then next, we'll discuss relevant NYSERDA resources and programs. And lastly, identify next steps. So the NYSERDA project manager will be included on all of these final meeting calls, and we'll be there to help provide information on the relevant NYSERDA programs and resources. You know, we're not expecting consultants to have researched all of our programs for the meeting, but you can certainly flag programs that you think may be a good fit for the customer, and we can go over and discuss those. I think one of the major goals of the initiative and the meeting is that customers who partake in the low carbon capital planning studies will review the study findings that have been provided to them and implement recommended low carbon measures. And we really want to make that goal as actionable as possible for the customer. So next steps. So really exciting news. More information is now available as of today on the FlexTech documents and resources page, and we've linked that page here. I encourage everyone to go ahead and take a look after this webinar. And then additional questions, please contact flextech@nyserda.ny.gov. We are reserving some time for Q&A, but anything that we can't get to or needs follow-up, please feel free to reach out to us at that email address. And then lastly, please stay tuned for the launch of the Multifamily Pathways PON, aka the new implementation program for low carbon retrofits. We have some exciting stuff coming in that new program launch, so please be on the lookout for that. And with that said, we'll jump right into questions. So anyone who has questions, please send them in the chat and we'll try to get to as many as we can. All right. So the first question that we received, is it possible to go back to one of the initial slides, summing up the changes compared to the previous versions? Um, Yeah, so we will be sharing these slides after the webinar. So I encourage everyone to go ahead and take a look at any slides that you may have missed or you want to revisit. The second question is, when will the FlexTech program start accepting low carbon capital planning scopes of work? So as we briefly discussed, the low carbon capital planning studies did go live on the FlexTech documents and resources page. So Mona, can you please confirm if that means we can begin starting to accept low carbon capital planning scopes of work?
Yeah, sure. I would say absolutely. Now that they're live, please feel free to check out the FlexTech documents and resources page. If you scroll to the bottom, there's a multifamily low carbon capital planning support section, and where you can find the guidelines for these studies as well as the final report supplement attachment. But yeah, for the application for the scope of work, I would just refer to the guidelines document. But yes, we are definitely welcoming projects as of now.
Thank you, Simona. All right, so the next question, electrification ready. No need for any electrified component, or there needs to be one. So that's a really good question. So we have two, I guess, conditional requirements for the study. The first is studies most focus on electrification or electrification readiness measures. In instances of electrification readiness, those types of studies are really geared towards recommending measures that can enable future electrification, such as substantial um, envelope and ventilation improvements, etc. Simona, is there any other electrification readiness measures or anything that I may have missed in my answer?
Yeah, I would just say, we do have those two components like Jesse mentioned. So if at this stage your customer or this building isn't looking for electrification specifically, we would just want to make sure that the other measures that you're planning to include in the study would be supportive of electrification in the future. So like Jesse mentioned, making substantial improvements in other building systems, looking at electrical service upgrades, all of those that can eventually lay the groundwork for electrification going forward would qualify.
All right. So the next question, and this is another good one. Um, if the building recently had an ASHRAE Level 2 study completed and is now looking to get a more specific, is the Level 2 study still required? How many years old would be allowed? It's not something I think that I've thought about personally just yet. It is a new initiative, but I'll pass that question along to Simona. But it's definitely a good question to ask and something, if we don't have an answer right now, we can start thinking about.
Yeah, I think typically in FlexTech, I don't think we fund the same study, I believe, until 3 years after, or 3 years time has elapsed. I think we would need to just double check, but it would be great to know like if there are any differences in the proposed scope of study between the last ASHRAE Level 2 and the one you're proposing to bring through the low carbon capital plan. But yeah, we can follow up with you on that.
And next question, This seems to focus on longer term planning. If a client is more interested in a 3 to 5 year capital plan, is that allowed? So yes, that is allowed through this program. The program is designed in a way to try to help folks plan around existing capital improvement milestones, and if they need to, phase those out as much as possible to try to make it easier on the client. But if they are interested in a 3 to 5 year capital plan, that's great as well, and we definitely welcome them to apply and participate.
Yeah, and I would just add the long-term phased implementation plan that Jesse walked through, whether they're focused on a shorter time horizon or a longer time horizon. This is just a high-level exercise we want you all to take with all of your customers to lay out, what are the potential capital planned or potential capital improvements in the coming 10 years. So if you only have a plan through the next 5 years, and you can help them anticipate some, in the 5 years later, that's great. If it's focused more on the 3 to 5 years, that's fine. But in the actual study itself, so not necessarily the spreadsheet that we walk through, you can certainly have a more targeted time horizon focus custom to what the customer is looking for.
Next question, for low to moderate income housing, is there flexibility with the cost share or other programs available to support their financial constraints? So the capital planning studies are open to both affordable housing and market rate. And as far as the cost share, it is a 75% cost share, which is higher than the standard flex tech offering of, I believe, 50%. So there is a higher cost share for this program specifically, and we definitely hope that that may be intriguing to the low to moderate income housing customer base. But I don't believe that this initiative specifically can go over that cost share amount. But Simona, do you know of any additional NYSERDA support that may be beneficial to that customer base?
Yeah, so I think maybe in a later webinar to this crowd, we can talk about how this offering plays well or articulates with some of the other programs that NYSERDA has to offer for multifamily buildings. So programs like MPP, which is focused on implementation, that is implementation funding specifically geared towards affordable buildings. And the new program that Jesse mentioned, the low carbon pathways for multifamily buildings, this will provide implementation support for both market rate and affordable buildings. But certainly as more resources come online for low to moderate income communities, we will make sure to share that with you all.
Thanks, Simona. And yeah, as we briefly discussed as well, projects that participate in the capital planning studies, we do have that final meeting with the consultant, NYSERDA, and the customer. And that definitely leaves the floor open as well to discuss any questions that customers have and get an idea of their project specific goals and try to connect them with any other programs or resources that NYSERDA may have to offer. Next question, can eligible projects comply with NYSERDA MPP pursuing long-term phased implementation of low carbon retrofits, or does MPP projects need a quicker construction timeline? I will pass that question along to Simona.
Yeah, I'm not sure I totally follow the question, so please feel free to maybe restate it in there. We don't have any particular time requirements, but certainly if we know ahead of time that you are interested in participating in other programs, we can certainly do our best to make sure the timing can dovetail. with your other participation.
Yeah, I think the question essentially is asking if a project participates in the low carbon capital planning study, do they need to implement measures on a if they end up going through the MPP program as well, are they held to a quicker timeline than the capital planning study may have planned out?
Yeah, I think how about, so this kind of sounds like if, if a project comes through the low carbon capital plan, like does this, it sounds like the question is, does this expedite any of the implementation through the MPP program? I'm not sure if the focus is there or if it's on like, are there required measures through the MPP program that they would need to install? But in any case, we can certainly, I don't think we have an answer yet on whether this can expedite the process through MPP, but certainly we're collecting a lot of the same information that program would be looking for. So we can follow up with you on this point as well.
Got it. And it looks like the individual that asked that question just followed up and to clarify and said, can an MPP project construction timeline last 5 to 10 years? That's the main question. I guess I'm not as familiar with MPP. My focus is definitely on these low carbon initiatives, but Simona, I'm not sure if you had anything else additional to add there. It might be something we have to check with the MPP team and follow up on.
Yeah, and thank you for clarifying. I would definitely say that this 10-year time horizon is really, the intent is to show a reduced incremental cost of considering the timing of these improvements. I think the MPP program requirements for when how long projects have to complete construction once the project is approved, that timeline is independent of these program recommendations. But certainly these program recommendations, you should feel free to leverage those to kind of time when to best participate in the different programs.
Right. Thank you, Simona. It looks like that is the last question. I'll give everyone another moment. If you have any additional questions, feel free to ask. All right, it looks like we just received a new question. So, are we allowed to charge more than 10% of the total utilities for the FlexTech study? Simona, do you remember the answer to that off the top? I'd have to check my notes on that one.
Yeah, I believe our project types are also capped based on the total annual energy expenditure. So for the portfolio level studies, because this is intended for a group of buildings to be coming in, the cap is actually at 2% of the total annual energy expenditure, I believe up to 100,000. And then for the building specific study, it's capped at, I believe, 10% of the total annual expenditure, energy expenditure up to 500,000, I believe.
All right. Looks like we got one more question. Can you please just reiterate where to go for the most information on this program at this moment? All right. So the FlexTech documents and resources page will have the low carbon capital planning studies information posted. So there's one document that specifically goes over um, like the program guidelines and overview. And then the other document that's included there is the final report supplement that we went over. So definitely encourage you to visit that link. And when we share the slide deck, I'll make sure to include the link to that page for any of you folks that may not have that readily available. Oh, and Simona just sent the link in the chat as well. Thank you, Simona. All right. I don't see any more questions coming in, and we're about at time. But I really thank everyone for making it. We're excited for the program launch, and yeah, we really hope everyone takes advantage of what's available. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us or email the FlexTech inbox, and yeah, we'll be following up. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much.